The howling winds swept unrelentingly across the desolate frozen expanse, biting into Princess Celera's skin like shards of glass. The icy wasteland stretched infinitely in all directions, a bleak and unforgiving landscape that mirrored the despair in her heart. Her once magnificent royal robes, symbols of her status as the daughter of a galactic emperor, were now nothing but shredded, tattered remnants clinging feebly to her trembling form. The regal blues and silvers of her attire were dulled by frost, offering no solace against the unyielding cold. Every step she took felt like a monumental effort. Her legs, weighed down by exhaustion and the encroaching frostbite, moved sluggishly. Her lungs burned with each shallow gasp of air, the bitter cold stinging her throat and chest. It was a struggle to even think, her mind fogged not only by the biting chill, but by the raw sting of betrayal that had shattered her world. She had been a princess, revered and untouchable, the heir to an empire that spanned galaxies. Yet in one treacherous moment, everything had been torn away. Her most trusted advisors, those she had leaned on for guidance and protection, had conspired against her. Their coup was swift and ruthless, leaving her stranded on this forsaken planet at the galaxy's edge, a place so remote that rescue was a near impossibility. The endless whiteness of the landscape mocked her with its oppressive silence. There were no sounds of life, no movements other than the ceaseless flurry of snow. It was as though the planet itself had been forgotten, abandoned by the universe. The realization of her isolation pressed heavily on her chest, an unbearable weight that nearly drove her to her knees. Her psychic abilities, once a powerful asset that allowed her to bend the wills of even the strongest minds, had been sapped by the relentless cold. The freezing temperatures dulled her senses and drained her strength, leaving her helpless and exposed. The faint hum of energy that had always coursed through her veins was now a distant memory, replaced by an unbearable numbness. As she stumbled forward, her vision blurred. The snow beneath her feet felt more like quicksand, pulling her down with every step. Finally, her body gave out. She collapsed into the snow, its icy grip seeping into her very core. For a fleeting moment, she considered giving in, letting the cold take her. Death seemed almost merciful compared to the torment of fighting for survival in this endless wasteland. 17.6, the first letter read. As she stumbled forward, her vision blurred. The snow seemed almost merciful compared to the torment of fighting for survival in this endless wasteland. But then, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She had been born into power, groomed to lead and to overcome. She couldn't let her traitors have the satisfaction of knowing they had defeated her. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to rise. Every movement was agony, her muscles screaming in protest, but she refused to give up. Survival was no longer just a necessity, it was an act of rebellion. The wind screamed around her, pelting her with snow that stung her exposed skin. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her strength waning with every step. Just as the darkness of despair began to creep into her mind once more, she felt it, a warmth, soft and startling against her frost-bitten skin. She blinked, trying to focus her blurred vision. Before her stood a creature she could scarcely believe was real. A large, white-furred dog. Its coat was thick and pristine, almost glowing against the stark whiteness of the snow. Its dark eyes, full of intelligence and concern, locked onto hers. Where had it come from? How could a creature like this exist on a planet so devoid of life? Effectively, she said. She looked around to check on the planet, so devoid of life. The dog moved closer, nudging her gently with its nose. Its warmth was a stark contrast to the unyielding cold, a lifeline in her moment of despair. Celera felt a surge of gratitude and wonder. This animal, this loyal companion, had appeared out of nowhere, offering her a glimmer of hope when she had nearly given up. With great effort, she pushed herself to her feet, leaning heavily on the dog's sturdy form. Each step was a struggle, her body trembling with exhaustion, but the dog stayed by her side, guiding her through the storm. The howling wind and blinding snow became less oppressive with the creature's warmth and presence to steady her. Hours seemed to pass as they trudged through the snow, though time had lost all meaning in the featureless expanse. The silence of the wasteland was broken only by the wind and the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. Celera's mind wandered, flitting between the memories of her betrayal and the faint hope that perhaps, somehow, she could escape this frozen hell. Then, through the blizzard, a shadow emerged. A figure wrapped in heavy furs moved with purpose, striding toward her with confident, deliberate steps. Her heart raced, a mix of fear and relief coursing through her. Before she could react, the figure reached her, draping a thick, fur-lined coat over her shivering shoulders. "Easy now," the figure said, his voice low and warm. "You're safe. I've got you." Celera tried to speak, to ask who he was, but her throat was too dry, her body too weak. The man scooped her up effortlessly, cradling her against his chest. The warmth of his coat and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear lulled her into a strange, dreamlike state. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a semblance of safety. She felt a semblance of safety. "Stay with me," the man murmured, his voice a soothing anchor in the storm. "Don't give up now." As the darkness closed in, Celera's last sight was of the dog, its eyes shining with unwavering loyalty. She clung to that image, allowing it to guide her into unconsciousness. When she awoke, it was to the crackling sound of a fire. The warmth was real, comforting and thick, chasing away the lingering cold that had threatened to consume her. Her senses slowly sharpened, taking in her surroundings. The ceiling above her was rough, carved from stone, and the flickering glow of the fire danced along the walls, casting shifting shadows. She lay on a bed of soft animal pelts, her body stiff but no longer freezing. Across the room, the man who had saved her sat by the fire, stirring a pot. His back was to her, but even from this angle, she could see the strength in his posture, the broad shoulders and steady hands. At his feet lay the dog, its eyes closed, but ears twitching at every sound. Hazel's thoughts were a whirlwind. The betrayal, the storm, the freezing cold that had nearly claimed her life, it all felt distant, like a half-forgotten nightmare. Yet the bruises on her body and the sting of frostbite on her fingers reminded her of its harsh reality. She needed answers, and she needed them now. With a soft groan, she tried to sit up. The rustle of pelts caught the man's attention, and he turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You're awake?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Good. I wasn't sure how long you'd be out." Celera swallowed, her throat dry. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than a rasp. Who are you?" The man smiled, but it was a tired smile, tinged with sadness. "Just someone passing through," he replied, handing her a cup of warm water. "Drink. You need your strength." As she sipped the water, her thoughts raced. This man, this stranger, had saved her life. But why? And what was he doing on this desolate planet? The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the cave besides their breathing. Celera glanced at the dog, still lying near the fire, its eyes watching her with quiet intelligence. There was something strange about this creature, something that felt almost otherworldly. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice stronger now. The man hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the fire. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with meaning. This planet, it's not as empty as it seems." Celera stood in awe before the structure that loomed over her, a sentinel of the ancient past. Its surface shimmered faintly, an interplay of light and shadow that made it seem alive. It towered higher than anything she had ever seen, its edges sharp and alien, etched with symbols that writhed and shifted, as if resisting comprehension. This was no mere artifact. It was a relic, a monument to a forgotten era. Her pulse quickened as her eyes traced the alien patterns, each curve and line pulsating with a faint, almost hypnotic glow. "It's been here for millennia," the man whispered, his voice low and reverent, as though afraid to disturb the sanctity of the moment. hidden, forgotten, but not anymore. The air around the monolith felt charged, vibrating with a frequency that hummed against her skin. It wasn't just the sight of it that captivated her. There was a palpable force emanating from the structure, an unseen power that thrummed through the air like a heartbeat. She felt its presence pressing against her mind, an invitation and a warning intertwined. As she stepped closer, the sensation intensified, the vibration resonating within her chest. Her hand trembled as she reached out, fingers aching to touch the enigmatic surface. Before she could make contact, the ground beneath them quaked violently. Dust and loose stones fell from the cavern ceiling, and the oppressive silence was shattered by a voice, cold, unfamiliar, and resonant with authority. Celera froze, her heart pounding as the voice reverberated through the chamber. It was unlike anything she had ever heard, carrying a weight that seemed to pierce through her very being. The words echoed off the cavern walls, growing louder and more menacing with each repetition. It wasn't merely a sound, it was a presence, an undeniable force that filled every corner of the vast space. The dog growled low, its hackles raised as it stepped protectively in front of her. Its body was tense, ears pinned back, every muscle poised for action. Beside her, the man's hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt, though they both knew it would be useless against whatever had spoken. For a moment, the cavern was still. Only the faint hum of the monolith broke the silence, its eerie melody filling the void. Then, from the deepest shadows, a figure began to emerge. It moved with an unnatural grace, its form shimmering as though caught between realities. Translucent and ghostly, it flickered in and out of existence, its shape vaguely humanoid but veiled in an ethereal mist. "Who are you?" Celera's voice was shaky but defiant, cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. "Show yourself. You are not meant to be here," the voice spoke again, this time emanating from the figure itself. "This place is not for the living." Celera's breath caught. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. Legends of guardians, ancient entities bound to protect forbidden knowledge, surfaced in her thoughts. Could this being be the gatekeeper of the secrets her enemies had sought to deny her? Was this the power that had cost her everything? The man stepped forward, his gaze locked on the figure. Despite the tension in his posture, his voice was steady. "We're here now," he said, his words firm, "and we're not leaving until we get answers." "Better yet, why are you here?" the man demanded. The figure's form seemed to ripple, its translucent edges flaring and dimming as though considering his words. Then, with an unnervingly fluid motion, it glided closer. Its presence was suffocating, the air around it growing colder with each passing second. "Answers," it whispered, the word carrying a dark, mocking tone. "You seek knowledge of what lies beneath, the truth that has been buried for millennia. Very well, but know this. Once you learn, there is no escape from the consequences." End of chapter 53. The truth that has been buried from the consequences. Celera felt her pulse quicken, the weight of the entity's words pressing down on her like a physical force. The cavern seemed to grow darker, the monolith's glow more pronounced against the encroaching shadows. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, but she couldn't. Not now. She had lost too much to walk away. "I need to know," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Tell me what this place is. What are you?" The figure tilted its head, a flicker of something like curiosity passing through its amorphous form. "I am a guardian," it said. "A sentinel of knowledge long forbidden. This structure," it gestured toward the glowing monolith with a fluid motion, "is not of your time, nor of your kind. It is a relic of the first beings, those who shaped the stars before your people even drew breath." Celera's mind reeled. The first beings were the stuff of myth, ancient entities whose existence was whispered of in hushed tones. Their technology was said to be so advanced it bordered on magic, their creations scattered across the galaxy as remnants of their dominion. And yet, they had vanished, their fate a mystery shrouded in time. This, the Guardian continued, its tone darkening, is their final legacy. A device capable of unimaginable creation or destruction. It can reshape worlds, bend the laws of reality itself, but its power comes at a price too great for any mortal to bear. What price? The man asked, his voice edged with suspicion. The Guardian's form flickered, its voice growing colder. It feeds on the essence of those who seek to control it. Their minds, their souls, all consumed by the hunger of the void. It is why this planet is barren, why the first beings vanished. They sought to wield its power, and in the end, it devoured them. The cavern fell into a heavy silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Celera's gaze returned to the monolith, its glow pulsating like a heartbeat. She could feel its pull, the temptation of the power it promised. With this, she could reclaim everything, her kingdom, her family, her life. But at what cost? The Guardian's voice softened, a whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of her own mind. You stand at the edge of the same abyss. What will you choose? Celera's heart raced as the enormity of the choice before her sank in. The air around her grew colder, the oppressive energy of the monolith pressing down on her like a weight she could barely bear. For a moment, the faces of her enemies flashed in her mind, and with them, the fire of her anger flared. She couldn't walk away, not after everything she'd endured. Celera widened her eyes and saw she could see all the lights along the way. Not after everything she'd endured. I have to try, she whispered, more to herself than to the others. The Guardian's form loomed closer, its presence suffocating. Then step forward, child of the stars. Claim your fate. The cave trembled violently, its walls groaning under the strain of impending collapse. Run! Celera shouted, her voice raw with urgency as she grabbed the man's arm. Without hesitation, they sprinted toward the entrance, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Ahead of them, the dog bolted like an arrow, its sharp barks echoing through the cavern, a warning as much as a guide. Behind them, the once sturdy walls began to crumble, sending a deadly cascade of rocks and debris raining down. The monolith's power, now spiraling out of control, filled the air with an ominous hum. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through their very bones, a harbinger of destruction. The ground beneath their feet quaked violently, threatening to throw them off balance with every step. Celera's lungs burned, her legs screamed in protest, but she couldn't afford to stop. None of them could. The roar of collapsing stone and the chaotic energy of the monolith chased them like a tidal wave, relentless and unforgiving. As they neared the cave's entrance, the freezing wind bit into their skin, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the collapsing cavern. Then, with a deafening explosion, the monolith's power erupted, shaking the ground with the force of an earthquake. Celera and the man barely made it out in time, bursting into the open air just as the cave imploded behind them. The sound was deafening, a symphony of destruction that left their ears ringing. They collapsed onto the snow, gasping for breath, the cold seeping into their bones as the dust and debris settled around them. For a moment, the world was silent. The sky above, now clear and unmarred by storm clouds, stretched out in an endless expanse of stars. The frozen wasteland lay still and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Celera lay on her back, her chest heaving as she stared upward, the enormity of what had just happened crashing down on her like a wave. Beside her, the man's breathing was steady but labored, his dark eyes reflecting the stars above. Between them, the dog curled up, its warm fur a small comfort against the biting cold. It's over, Celera whispered, her voice barely audible. The words felt fragile, as if speaking them too loudly might shatter the tenuous peace they had found. The man turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable. Yeah, he said softly. It's over. And yet, as they lay there under the vast expanse of stars, Celera couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The monolith's power was gone, obliterated in the explosion, but the void it had opened, that insidious, hungering darkness, lingered in her mind. It had tasted her, and she couldn't help but feel it watching, waiting in the shadows of the universe. One day it would return. She was certain of that, but for now at least they were free. The following morning brought an eerie calm. The sun broke through the gray clouds, casting soft, golden rays across the snow-covered plains. The storm was gone, leaving behind a landscape that was both beautiful and desolate. Celera stood at the edge of their makeshift camp, her body aching from the ordeal as she gazed out at the vast icy expanse. The weight of everything that had transpired pressed heavily on her. She had been brought to the brink, her soul nearly consumed by the monolith's dark power, and yet she had survived. But survival came with its own burden, the knowledge of the void's hunger, a force that would never truly be extinguished. Beside her, the man packed their meager supplies with quiet efficiency. His movements were deliberate, almost meditative, as if the act of preparing for the journey ahead offered him some semblance of control. The dog sniffed the ground nearby, its tail wagging faintly as it seemed to take in the stillness that surrounded them. The cave that had housed the monolith was now buried under a mountain of rubble, its ancient power erased from the surface. Emmett Reinhardt released the man and pulled away from the cave, with Emmett still protecting the monolith, its ancient power erased from the surface. But the echoes of its destruction lingered in the air, a reminder of how close they'd come to annihilation. "Do you think it's really over?" the man asked, breaking the silence. His voice was gruff but steady, his dark eyes meeting Celera's with an unspoken question. She hesitated, the weight of her thoughts making it hard to answer. The immediate threat was gone, yes, but the void was something else entirely. It was endless, infinite in its hunger. Destroying the monolith had been a victory, but it was just one piece of a much larger darkness. "For now," she replied after a long pause. "But the void? It's not something that ever truly ends. I think it's always there, in the shadows, waiting." The man nodded, his expression solemn. "Then we keep moving. There are always other battles to fight." Celera glanced at him, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie. This man, this human, had appeared out of nowhere to help her. He hadn't known who she was or the danger she carried, yet he had fought by her side without hesitation. She had been taught to distrust, to rely only on herself and her royal heritage. But here, in the middle of a frozen wasteland, this stranger had become her most trusted ally. "I never asked," she said quietly. "Who are you, really?" The man chuckled softly, brushing snow from his coat. "You can call me Cade. Just another wanderer, trying to stay alive out here. Not much more to it." "Cade," Celera repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It was simple, unassuming, yet it carried a weight that seemed to fit him perfectly. "You saved my life. I owe you a debt." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. We got through this together. That's what matters." The question of what to do next hung in the air. For Celera, the path forward was uncertain. She could return to her empire, fight for her throne, and seek vengeance against those who had betrayed her. But the thought of returning to petty court politics felt hollow. She had touched true power, a power that could unravel reality itself, and it had nearly destroyed her. Could she really go back to a life of ambition and control? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. "I spent my whole life preparing to rule, and now, I don't even know if that's what I want anymore." Cade studied her for a moment, then gestured to the horizon, where the faint outlines of mountains stood against the brightening sky. "There's a whole galaxy out there," he said. "Plenty of places where someone like you could make a difference, without needing a throne." Celera followed his gaze, her heart beating faster at the thought. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was more to life than the endless struggle for power and control. Maybe, out there beyond the empire she once called home, she could find a new purpose. "I never thought I'd say this," she murmured, But maybe the galaxy is bigger than just my empire. Cade smiled, a quiet, understanding smile. That's something most people don't realize until they've lost everything. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Celera wasn't afraid. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.